Today is a special episode on the Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage. We cover the Convention, the operational guidelines, as well as the key roles UNESCO and the World Heritage Center have with regards to the Convention, and answer some fan mail.
All right, ready?
Ready.
All right. Let's see. Well, first of all, happy Sunday,
Happy Sunday to you too.
because we have to congratulate ourselves for actually doing this for four Sundays in a row.
That's a milestone.
It is a milestone. I think we only got to episode 3 last time, and we did it over the course of 3 months. So yeah, congratulations to us.
So an improvement in consistency.
So, let's first of all let's explain what happened here to those who are listening only to the audio and are not looking at the video, which I'm showing right now.
Okay.
Which is our first fan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Henry Bergeron, who is a friend of mine back in the U.S., commented on our YouTube video. And so I have the text on the screen right now, but for the audio viewers, I'm going to put the first question in text to speech. So here we go, text to speech. There. And so he starts with it was a reference to our, what was it, the first episode?
The first episode of the second season. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So he had to say about the first episode the following, which was,
Thrawn Mitch said so well, it's no surprise that the wealthiest countries have the most World Heritage sites. I wonder if there's a correlation to the religious affiliation of sites and their respective.
Oh, I guess it only goes a certain distance. But their respective funding, also great points about government funding and agencies and funding coming in from the wealthy. A couple of questions. So the first question, I think we can do text to speech again. Thank you, Henry, for your lovely voice, of course.
Yeah. I'll do text to speech. I have inbuilt text to speech. Would you consider the fire at the museum in Brazil a greater loss because of the wider spectrum of history destroyed, or on par with Notre Dame? Yeah. So that was his first question.
Yeah, that was his first question. And I think, you know what we can do? I think we can talk about questions 1 and 2 at the same time. So question 2 is also if the government had to submit forms to UNESCO to make changes, etc., to heritage sites, and that it seems inefficient currently, would a government office specific to each country be more efficient, or does each country already have some sort of representative inside UNESCO and the bureaucracy is bogging it down? So these two questions can be reviewed at the same time.
Okay. I'd like to make a suggestion. I'm more confident dealing with the first part of the question.
Okay.
I'm more confident with you dealing with the second part of the question. Not that you shouldn't deal with the first question.
Yeah.
But I believe I might have a bit more input in the first part of it.
Great. So then let's start with question 1, and then when we get to World Heritage things specifically, then we'll go question 2, and then we'll talk about question 3 afterwards.
Lovely. So weighing the loss of Notre Dame's roof and the loss of the museum in Brazil it's risky. It's on one hand, from my perspective, I'd say mainstream media, mostly Western media, give more attention to Notre Dame than the fire in Brazil. I felt like the fire in Brazil in the museum in Brazil was more of a footnote compared to how the world reacted to Notre Dame. And this is not a unique thing. It also happens when I have to bring in other unfortunate events. Whenever a terror attack happens in a less influential country, and around the similar time, a similar attack happens in a Western power, the incident in the Western power will receive more attention, will receive more global attention, and social media companies will be biased towards putting the safety indicator. At least Facebook, there's a way if you have a Facebook account and something happens within your geographical area, you can mark yourself safe. And for a long time, people from mostly third third world and less influential countries always complained that our troubles have a lesser magnitude than the troubles of these other people. So with the loss of the museum in Brazil, because the museum, from the reports I read and from people's comments, it appears that they lost almost everything, if not everything. There's very little to be salvaged. And in Notre Dame, where the loss was appeared to be mourned more, there was already a lot of resources and people ready to put it back into action. One of the commenter, his name, Henry, commented that about wealthy countries having more capacity to deal with their heritage sites, and it was the same case with France. Millionaires, and ordinary citizens were willing to put a lot of money or pledging funds to rebuild it. And not just that, there was also from the academic side of it, there was experts who did 3D mapping of Notre Dame. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are experts from different universities in the US and also from different parts of Europe who had done detailed 3D maps of Notre Dame, and they were ready to submit their findings and all the data they have, so that everything can be brought back to its original state,
or at least
as close as possible to how they knew it. And for the case of Brazil, I'd say perhaps I missed out on a lot of the outpouring of sympathy because the reports might have been in Portuguese. That might also play a factor. That might also play a role in how I viewed it from my perspective. But I'd say the loss in Brazil of the museum in Brazil has a more significant multitude. Not multitude. Is multitude the right word?
I think what we're trying to get at is that it covers a span of history. It covers it covers a wider variety of subjects than Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is a very specific building with a very specific history that, of course, is culturally significant, no doubt about it. I mean, even in what is it, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? That was adapted from the French novel about the Quasimodo, and that story got adapted to the Disney version. Also got put on as a play, which is definitely different than the Disney version. But this is like one small example of how the different cultures have grabbed onto Notre Dame and used it as a symbol of just like a really good building that has cultural significance. But I would argue that most museums that are right national museums, these cover a wider spectrum of subjects and things and ideas that you can't cover just with one building that stayed in one place.
Absolutely. And also, if I could wade into the political side of it, first of all, the administrative side of it, many of the citizen reactions, as it concerns Brazilian citizen reactions to the museum's loss, was that it was being mismanaged and there was very little in terms of funding that was going into protecting it.
Yeah.
So it was as much an administrative failure as just a terrible fire and catastrophe. And considering right now their president, Bolsonaro, I've been reading about plans by his administration by his government to open up sections of the Amazon to loggers.
Yeah.
And people want to extract resources from these areas, places that have uncontacted tribes. And I'm thinking some of these areas have been protected because they are home to indigenous communities, and indigenous people, and sometimes their heritage, sometimes aspects of their heritage, tangible aspects of their heritage that could be lost to time, are usually kept in museums for students, for interesting people, for people who want to know about where their country came from, for anybody interested in that aspect of their heritage.
Right.
And I feel like in that regard, the loss of the museum was big given the political environment. There's very little, there's I could be wrong, but I think there's very little in terms of political will to channel funds and resources towards heritage conservation.
You mean specifically in this case?
I mean specifically in this case, yeah. If
Yeah. I wouldn't. I think you're correct in saying that the current presidential head of
Mm.
Brazil
Mm.
would absolutely, yeah, it would not be at all interested in revitalizing anything relating to the indigenous people. But I would also say that we would have to ask someone who is from Brazil or is very connected with Brazilian heritage and or politics to actually get a straight answer for that, right?
yeah,
Because it's very possible that there are plenty of people there who are, I mean it was all over the news, so I assume that there was plenty of people who were devastated by this news and wanted something to be done. But I will take this opportunity actually to switch into question number 2
okay.
on the if governments have to submit forms to UNESCO to make changes on World Heritage sites and whatnot. Because
Uh-huh.
as we're saying, right? So right. The museum is not in the sense. So wait. Well, I'll go back to question 1 for a moment.
It's okay.
Question 1 compares the museum with Notre Dame.
Mhm.
And what we have to establish is that, at least within the World Heritage context, the museum, actually, that's a great question. Is the museum at all part of any World Heritage, like serial nomination or anything like that? Would we know that?
As much as I know, it was not, but I'm going to Google it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while you're looking that up, Notre Dame was and still is part of the World Heritage nomination of the Banks of the Seine, which we talked about in episode 1. But even if we were to compare them purely on outstanding universal value in terms of the World Heritage Convention, right? In that sense, purely, specifically, and only for the list of World Heritage, that you could easily compare and say, okay, if we are correct in saying that the museum was not part of World Heritage, and this can apply to any museum, right? The Smithsonian Museum, for example, we'll use that in this case.
Yeah.
If the Smithsonian Museum were to burn down overnight, would the burning of Notre Dame equal or be greater than the burning of all the Smithsonian Museum? And in the World Heritage context, specifically, the Smithsonian Museum is completely irrelevant. It has no outstanding universal value that allows it to be on the list, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, it's not comparable. But in terms of the culture lost, yeah, it's huge.
Okay, just as you're talking, I'm currently on the Wikipedia. The first thing that came up when I did a Google search, just to give an idea of UNESCO's interest in it. On the UNESCO website, there's a page that reads, UNESCO is ready to coordinate the international support for the restoration of the National Museum in Brazil.
Yes,
and
that would be in the museums section, right? So not necessarily World Heritage, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's not under World Heritage, and also UNESCO Emergency Mission to Rio de Janeiro helps guide efforts to restore Brazil's national museum.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, UNESCO definitely did have a hand in helping in a certain manner, but specifically World Heritage, not so much. I've pulled up the Brazil current list, and you have historic Old Town, Brasilia, a bunch of World Heritage sites, but nothing specific to this museum. So
okay, so yeah, what I find about UNESCO's interest in the museum, UNESCO is more of offering expertise and also trying to coordinate funding for the restoration and sending teams of experts and providing guidance on how to best reconstruct the museum.
Well, and you'll find actually that is mainly UNESCO's role.
Yeah.
So now this is great to transition to question 2. So about governments submitting forms to UNESCO to make changes to heritage sites, and basically how everything functions, right?
Right.
So using World Heritage, because that's what we know best. UNESCO itself does not manage or do anything relating to the day-to-day management or maintenance of any World Heritage site. It is not their role, right? Their primary role is to be the secretariat to the convention, which means they're essentially they're the referees.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking that the referees are the middle person. They just they facilitate.
Yeah, because if we were to think about it as a football game, right? And we're not talking about American football. We never are. We're always talking about football. If we're playing a football match, essentially the players on the field, first of all, it's like everybody's trying to score for themselves, and they all play by the same rules. So the referees are there to ensure that the process in which everybody agreed on is maintained.
Absolutely.
And that is essentially what the operational guide. So you have the convention, which establishes the rules, right? So they define what cultural heritage is. They define what natural heritage is in Articles 1 and 2. They essentially establish that there are ways to effectively take measures to protect cultural and natural heritage. And the convention basically says, here's what we want to achieve in these articles, right? So it's the World Heritage Committee shall adopt its rule of procedures. The committee can invite public or private organizations to participate in meetings. Every state party has to essentially submit certain documents or certain things, right? It's all about how the convention works and what they all agreed on. But how it functions when it comes to the World Heritage Committee is the operational guideline.
That's the nitty-gritties.
Yeah, fun. And the operational guidelines in the case have changed a bunch of times, but it dictates how committee sessions are run, how you submit documents to the World Heritage Center, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I'm also, so let's see, how to show this or how to explain this. So, yes. So if the governments have to submit forms to UNESCO to make changes, et cetera. All right. So anytime that there is a problem with a World Heritage Site, like Notre Dame, right? It is France's responsibility to tell the World Heritage Center that something happened. Now, in the case of Notre Dame, it's a very special case in the sense that since it was right next door to our building almost, there was a lot more press and a lot more involvement of UNESCO that is not normal, right?
Right.
Especially since on a scale of the list of World Heritage in danger, for example, we do make visits to all these danger-listed sites or missions, but since we were right next door, it was a lot quicker and it was a lot more. There was a lot more talk about it.
Special
that
case,
said,
as you say,
that said, so if the governments have to submit changes to UNESCO to make things more efficient, right? I mean, yes. I mean, they technically have to submit to the World Heritage Center, and every government has a permanent delegation to UNESCO and a national commission for each country, and these sponsor, fund, and politic everything within UNESCO related to World Heritage and all of the other conventions and other things in UNESCO. So in that case, what happens is we get these reports in the regional offices. I'm currently interning in Asia Pacific unit. You have Africa, North America, and Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the Arab states. And each of these regions receive all these notifications. They then if they essentially look at the claims, they will check to see if these are factual claims. They'll do a state of conservation report, et cetera, et cetera. It can take a long time to get anything done. Do you have a question, Martin, at this point?
I don't have a question at this point, but what I know is that UNESCO's position is usually very complicated when it comes to international matters, almost as complicated as the position of the UN, because from the outside and from people who might not be directly involved in learning about it or working within the organization, it seems like a really powerful organization that makes things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely that impression.
Yeah, there's usually that impression that UNESCO can just make things happen, but it's easy to overlook the fact that UNESCO is like, I'd say it's like, I'd compare it to a church. A church being, sometimes people view a church as a building, but a church is made of the congregation. And without the individual members of the congregation, if they all decide to go their own way, it's not really, viewing the church as a community of believers stops existing. So UNESCO is in a way a community of believers in the principles that have been laid out in the convention.
Yeah,
the individual countries being the believers.
But here's the weird thing, right? There are plenty of cases we've seen at the World Heritage Committee that, I mean, I think I've tweeted about it, where decisions are made by the state parties who run the convention and are not the referees, that are completely ignoring the rule book or are so bending the rules that the referees are looking at each other, looking through the rule book, trying to think, how can we not have this happen because it's bad.
Yeah, that's another way in which UNESCO, another complicated position for UNESCO, because as a referee you're supposed to decide and resolve any dispute that appears, but also at the same time, unlike the referee of ordinary sports where the rules are almost cast in stone, in this game that UNESCO is playing, the players make up the rules as they go.
I shouldn't laugh, but
that's the operational guidelines constantly getting updates here and there.
But here's the thing. Here's where the fun begins, right? The referees or the secretariat, since they're the ones who implement and manage the decision-making process, but they are not the ones who they can propose rules, but the only ones who can accept the rules are the state parties, which means that any new rule or any update to operational guidelines or I don't think you can update the convention. It's only the operational guidelines. Convention is set.
It's from 1972 that stays.
Yeah. So the changes to the operational guidelines have to be approved by I don't know which body. It's either the committee or it's the General Assembly of the State Parties of UNESCO. I'd have to ask someone more knowledgeable than I. But that said, it's the state parties of a specific group that make these decisions. Which means that if they don't like a decision, well, too bad. It's not
true. And if and depending on what their allies think or don't think, because of I remember how Kosovo's membership in UNESCO was put in peril because of their relationship with the West and former Soviet bloc countries.
No. So to answer then question 2, if governments have to submit forms of would government office specific to each country be more efficient? Well, first of all, the first half of that question, that already exists. There are government offices specific to each country, technically, that deal with all things related to UNESCO, and more often than not, they have their heritage or cultural person in their office who deals directly with the World Heritage Center. So yes, that exists. Or does each country already have some sort of representative? Yes, exactly. And the bureaucracy is just bogged down. Yeah, because everything has to be processed through the process of the operational guidelines and the World Heritage Convention, and everything has to be approved by the organization. So yes, it's slow. That's all.
Okay, and also to add on to that, if I can raise the issue of the controversial Elbe Valley delisting.
Yes,
That was
yeah.
the case where a country, or Germany in that case, the local government needed to make changes to the site, not specifically to the site, but infrastructural changes. They wanted to construct a bridge
Right.
across a heritage site, and I believe because of the relatively slower pace of bureaucracy on the UNESCO side, it was very easy for the local politicians to convince the public otherwise, and the site ended up being delisted. And consider Germany also has its own internal bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Because to jump on that, because there are also I think Shexiab is on the World Heritage list,
yeah.
and that has some definite challenges. So let me see if I can find it. So Historic Center of Shexiab is possibly might have to there was construction that was done. There's some work that was done which was not approved by the center, and it has been suggested for delisting a few times, and the final decision was just put it on the list of danger, which it is currently, as far as I know, and it's had state of conservation reports consistently since 2015 until even this year. Just 2018. We don't know about this year. But yeah, it's not in that case. I don't know. It's tough. It's yes, there are bureaucracy challenges in UNESCO, which does not allow for instant decision making, especially since oftentimes the committee has to make the final decision, not UNESCO itself.
Yeah, and they make it based on the guiding principles, on the principles that govern the convention, and not necessarily the needs that have come up in any state specific country or region.
Yeah,
that might need to make changes or sometimes destroy part of a site.
All right. So then, how about I ask you question 3, because I have a good idea of what I think about this, but I want to hear your idea first, which is Notre Dame enough of a wake-up call to other countries to secure more sites, or has it come and gone in the international eye for the time being? And it's been a month or so since it's happened, right?
Yeah.
So, tell me.
It's a predominant of a wake-up call to other countries to secure more sites.
Like, do you think, for example, in Kenya, they saw Notre Dame burning, and they're like, you know what, we should really think about conserving our sites?
I think in that case, it might be a wake-up call, not necessarily to secure more sites, because for some countries it seems like it's a marathon, and I'd say many European countries are guilty of that. They want to gonna catch them all, and the way they are constantly nominating sites, and sometimes 2 or 3 of the sites that they have are identical. Like not really identical, but they don't bring anything new to the table.
2 cathedrals.
Exactly. So I'd say it's a wake up call to secure the existing sites, and in some cases maybe to rethink, to reconsider what we take as a site's integrity, or there's those two. They always trip me up. Integrity and authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it might be a wake-up call for us to take another look at what we consider to be a site's authenticity, because perhaps the current sites that we have, that the world has, might need upgrades here and there, maybe some armor here, some strengthening there, and so on and so forth, to make it, to give them another, let's say, to give Notre Dame, for example, to boost its life by another 7 centuries, so to say. Yeah, so I'd say it shouldn't encourage people to rush to gather up more sites. So that
I personally think that it's going to come and go. It's still here for now because everybody's talking about its reconstruction. But I'm not convinced that Notre Dame was enough of a wake-up call for the sites who actually need the help, or actually need to rethink their management plan or management system. I do think it really put a good highlight on as you mentioned in the beginning, the preference that people put in social media, or at least the perceived notion that, wow, Notre Dame is on fire. That's terrible. And I think since we're both living in Europe, it also was amplified times 1,000. And then
Absolutely.
I'm in Paris, so that was times 1,000,000. So, but I'd be curious to ask someone who is not here in Europe, and maybe who's not so connected to any of this, and ask them, hey, did you hear about Notre Dame? Did you know that it's part of World Heritage Site? What do you think about that?
And
that'd be interesting.
Speaking of which, another interesting fact that came out with how the world processes bad news.
Yeah.
There was a graphic, I think, by Al Jazeera that compared interest that different parts of the world showed for different calamities. Because soon after Notre Dame, there was the bombings of the churches and hotels in Sri Lanka, and they had a graphic, and it showed that Notre Dame received much more attention, and mostly attention from the States, Canada, and generally most of Europe. And there was a few highlights in Africa, and the bombings in Sri Lanka received more attention from Asia, and it was a graphic projected to a map, and it received more attention from Asia, and very little from Europe and from Asia Pacific, and on the surface it looked like it was about to. Many people already commenting on Twitter like. The West and white people only care about their own. When other people have problems, it doesn't matter. An old building burnt down, and on this other side, hundreds of people were slaughtered. But the person who posted, there was someone who had a really insightful comment saying that, talking about the language in which these stories were reported in, because Notre Dame was mostly reported in English, and people who got to consume that news and people who got to be interested about it mostly came up. How do I put it?
They encountered it through English news channels, whether it's written or in like text or voice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also have to remember that, of course, because it's in France, the francophone coverage was also pretty massive.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it would be as much as English because British influence. But I do think it got massive coverage both for francophone and English news cycles, enough so that it covered so many more people than another comparable tragedy.
Yeah. So yeah. Perhaps in the future we could look in, or perhaps someone has already looked into it, how the language of news impacts. Where am I going with this?
How it impacts the perception.
Yeah, how it impacts the perception. Me as if I spoke only English, does that mean that I'd only feel the pain of people whose stories are reported in English, and will I be completely oblivious of other bad things that happen and
I would say yes. I would agree with that, right? How often do we hear about Portugal?
Not that often.
There's probably plenty of things happening in Portugal. I mean, it is a country on the European continent, and it's actually closer to the ocean than you or I, to the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's right on the sea, but we don't hear anything about it because we're also not in tune with like any Portuguese news or anything related to that.
Yeah.
So I would totally say yes. I think you're right. I think we don't unless the nation in question is a huge political or global or economic player.
Yeah.
You will not hear about them consistently on the news.
True. Because language is an extremely powerful vehicle.
Yeah. For culture, for
culture, for
information,
for information, for empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, right? I mean, it's not like I don't have the only things I've seen about anything related to Swahili, for example, is because it was in English and told me about Swahili news or whatnot.
I think for me, like when I came here and I first came to Germany, my German was limited, and whenever someone spoke loudly, my immediate reaction was they're upset.
Mhm.
Like, what an angry person. I was volunteering in a hospital. My first reaction to them was that my internal reaction, of course, was that this
Mhm.
person is really angry. But as soon as I understood the language, I could relate with them, and sometimes they just express themselves with. I got to know that some of these people just express themselves that way. They talk loudly and excited. It was more of excitement than anger.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so the language people speak, language barriers sometimes really blind us to a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, all right. I think then we covered that last question, yeah?
Yeah.
Is Notre Dame enough of a wake-up call? No, and so I think the consensus here is depends on who you talk to, but I think it's going to come and go. So yeah, good. There we go. And let's see. Anything else you want to chat about? I think we covered all the questions. That was a nice. We covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. You're quite efficient today.
It's what happens when we plan and we actually, we have a process in place.
We to encourage people to ask more questions.
I think so. And oh yeah, we should talk about a rebranding. Actually, that's
Yes.
something we should talk about, and on the podcast, because I think it's fun to document it.